Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today is the day where the Worlds Clash tab has gone live and teams are getting set for the last Clash of the season. And as such, I figured it would be a good idea to do a quick video running down some general Clash advice, especially given that the competition in this Clash tournament in particular will be one of the biggest that we've had all year, and it should be a very good tournament for everyone involved. It should be a lot of fun, but also the competition will be quite intense, so I really hope you guys are able to get some value out of the advice I'm about to give you, especially given that a lot of times people don't really play in competitive environments or environments where you have to be coordinating with a team or having an actual draft phase that matters. So a lot of times, people sort of get into this scenario and don't really know what to do. Even playing against them in Clash sometimes, I'm like, yeah, these guys don't really know how to run a draft. They just haven't ever done it before because they've just been playing solo queue, which, don't get me wrong, solo queue is important for a few reasons, but there are some things that solo queue does not help you with, and one of them is knowing how to run a draft and knowing how to coordinate as a 5-stack as opposed to just kind of doing your thing individually. So in general, that's a bit of a long-winded introduction, but we're going to go ahead and break down some things that you guys can use to improve your Clash experience and to hopefully improve your Clash placing. First and foremost, the scouting phase is one of the most important phases you guys can have, but it's not necessarily going to tell you the whole story. High mastery on a champion can help determine if someone will play that champion or not, but it's no guarantee, especially not because that player might not be playing that position, right? If you get together and your team group has 2 top lane mains, well, only one of them can play top lane. The other one will have to go fill in at a different role. And if that's the case, then the top lane player will not be playing top lane. So you might say, oh wow, this guy has 1.5 million mastery points on Darius. We have to worry about that. We have to ban that pick out. But if he's not top lane, then that is a wasted ban. And now, unfortunately, there's no way of knowing who is going to be in a lane, but you still want to have that sort of flexibility to say, is this a pick worth banning? Now, it might be the case where you're like, yeah, 1.5 million mastery points on Darius. I have no good champions into that matchup. And it's going to crush our team strategy. So we do need to ban it out because we just have no way of dealing with it. But you kind of have to evaluate that on a case-by-case basis and sort of say, is this a relevant pick? Do we have counter picks to this? Is this the kind of pick that will beat us if it's able to get ahead, if it's able to be on a player who's super skilled at the champion? If that's not the case, then you probably don't have anything to worry about from that particular pick and you can let it go. So, for example, I played a tournament, an enemy team banned on our Sion, one-tricks Sion, but because he was mid lane, it was an irrelevant ban. The other thing players do on occasion is just ban a champion because, well, you play it a bunch, but you might not even be expecting to play it in that game. So, for example, my highest mastery champion at this point in time is Kled, but in the most recent tournament I played in, I never played Kled once. I had no intention of playing Kled because our team generally needed initiation, and I was able to play Malphite in all the games we played because I just said, we need initiation, Malphite is going to initiate, this works way better. So essentially they were wasting bans on a pick that wasn't really that relevant and wasn't actually going to do what they wanted it to do. If you're confused about what players are more likely to play, checking their op.gg is a good way of finding out what they've been playing recently and what champions they've played most, especially in ranked. That's a good way of sort of evaluating what kind of picks are in their wheelhouse and what kind of picks are most likely to come out. Obviously, you have no idea if they plan on playing the champion or not, but having at least an idea of what is likely to come through is a good thing. The other thing you can always do, especially later in rounds, is look at their previous match histories and see what champions they've been playing in previous rounds. If you look at the enemy team and they played Varus in both of the previous games they were in, maybe that's a ban-worthy champion because you know that they at least prioritize the Varus. They think it's very strong. Their bot laner's probably comfortable on Varus. That might be a pick that's worth banning out at that point. And generally, that is how I would weight your pick. Your ban potential is looking at the kinds of champions that they are more likely to play. Look at the kinds of champions that they have played in the Clash already. That's a good way of sort of saying if this is going to be relevant or not. Once you finally hit draft, again, you want to be worrying about players you don't need to worry about players' mastery as much because, again, if they have high mastery, it doesn't necessarily mean it's worth a ban. So you do want to kind of think about the particular strategy that you've got. So if you know the enemy top laner plays Malphite, and you plan on playing an assassin mid lane and an AD top laner and maybe an AD jungler like Lee Sin, well, you probably don't actually want to let them play the Malphite because that will hard counter your team, and you know he will pick it in that scenario if it's available. However, if you know you're going to be playing a mage mid, an AP jungler like Elise, maybe even an AP top laner like Rumble, you can leave the Malphite available even if the dude has 2 million mastery points on this Malphite pick because it's not going to be relevant. He would be counterpicking himself if he chose to go for it. If he locks it in early, you're able to flex your draft around that pick now that you know it exists. So you don't necessarily have to leave a ban on it because even though he's skilled, he probably won't want to pick it and into a mage composition, and even if he does, that just gives you a tremendous advantage against them. So you don't need to use a ban there, even if the guy has a ton of mastery on the pick. And so this generally goes for a lot of other picks. If you know they play a counter pick to your preferred mid laner, but you have another mid laner that you like to play instead, it might be a better idea to just let them take their counter pick and then choose your counter pick matchup to them instead. You don't have to ban it out just because they play it quite a bit if you have a pick that's going to work really well against it. The other thing to consider is if the enemy team plays a particular champion that you play as well. So if you say, we play Aphelios a lot, we really want to make sure we lock in Aphelios for our bot lane, but they also play Aphelios, that might be worth an early pick in order to just make sure you secure it. If you can't early pick it, it may be possible for you guys to say instead, we have to ban this first. Because if you're on red side, for example, they will have their option of first pick. Maybe that they will just grab the Aphelios because it's super strong and they just want to have their bot laner have access to that pick. So that might be worth a ban in that regard because even though you would like to play it, they are very likely to pick it as well, and you may not have a counter to that particular matchup. So that is an example of a good ban that maybe you don't always do, but it's sort of like, we just don't want to make sure they get it if we can't first pick it. You can also practice target banning, which is one of my preferred strategies because it can really tilt people out, especially in this sort of less coordinated environment. Obviously, the pros are very good at kind of saying, we don't really care. You can try to target ban a particular player, but they either have a wide pool or they're a bunch of champions that just they play but aren't worth banning. But especially in Clash, a lot of times players don't play that many champions. They only play maybe 2 or 3 champions. And it can be a strategy to say, especially if the enemy team doesn't have any other champs that are very strong that you absolutely have to ban out. So, for example, if you know they have a god like Samira, that might be a champion that you have to ban. But if they don't, you might look at their top laners pool and say, this dude only plays Camille and Riven. So if we ban Camille and Riven, he's going to be forced onto a different pick entirely. It's going to put him on a pick he's not comfortable on. It potentially means he doesn't really have a champion to play other than them, and he just kind of has to pick something at random. And in general, it means that you have a better opportunity to exploit that player. And so that's a fun strategy that you can go for in some regards. Now, you have to be looking at their champion pool. If they play, 4 or 5 separate champions, it probably isn't worth it to try and target ban a particular player. But there are options to do it, especially if, like I said before, there aren't really any other bans that you're particularly prioritizing. You can just ban out a top laner or mid laner. It's usually not as effective against junglers or bot laners because those pools tend to have not as great counter picks in general. So it's a little bit harder to exploit that. But you do have some opportunities to go for things like that. You also want to be trying to save your solo lanes for last, if at all possible. Obviously, if a power pick or a contested pick is available first, it might be worth first picking, but if you can wait on your mid laner or top laner, you have a better chance of getting a counter pick, which is very important for those lanes because they, I think, have the hardest counter picks. It's kind of hard to counter pick a bot lane matchup, it's kind of hard to counter pick a jungle matchup, but especially in solo lanes, it's really easy to find a champion in particular and say, I'm going to pick this, and there's not really anything your pick can do against it. So, for example, picking a Zed into an Aurelion Sol player. What is the Aurelion Sol ever going to do about a Zed? Once you finally get into the game, you need to know what your team's win conditions are. Just group is not a win condition unless you've drafted a team fight composition, and even then you can lose to a team if they have a stronger team fight composition. This game in the background is actually a good example of that. Our team fight ended up being significantly better than theirs, even though they had what looks like a really powerful team fighting composition, because we had the Taric ultimate to kind of weather the initial storm, and then the damage can come through from things like the Jax or the Ashe. Even if you're ahead on a team fight, even if you're ahead in a game, if you haven't drafted a team fight composition and they did, you can still lose that because you're playing right into their wheelhouse. You're saying, my team doesn't team fight very well, but we're going to team fight you anyways, and just hoping that your gold advantage is going to make up that difference. It doesn't always happen. So you wanted to make sure you know what your team is going to be playing for. If you're playing for picks, ward up and look for picks. If you're playing for split push, you need to have 4 members of your team creating pressure for your split pusher so they can actually get things done. That is going to help you know how to actually play the game once you get in. And if you don't really know what your team is supposed to do, you can flounder even if you had a great draft. Sort of similar to that, you want to know what your initiation looks like, or if you'll be initiating at all. Some teams can play a counter engage where essentially you have no initiation. You know the enemy team is going to initiate on you, so you just play back and wait for them to come to you. That's a little bit harder to execute on because you have to be very reactive, but it can be very good if you know the enemy team is stacking up for a team fight composition. But in general, you want to know what your team looks like. What are their go buttons? That can be as simple as an Ashe's Enchanted Crystal Arrow, or as sort of difficult to work with as something like looking for a Pantheon flank or a Twisted Fate flank. But either way, knowing how you can start fights is a good way to sort of understand and acknowledge how you can actually triumph in some of these fights and how you can start something on your own merits as opposed to waiting for the enemy team to start it for you. Communication is also really key. I know if you're playing with randos, especially, it might stifle this a little bit, but you have a chat client in the League of Legends client that you can always use. Discord is free. There are a lot of other chat clients that you can make use of and sort of utilize in order to make sure your team is communicating. And that's really important, is to be informing your team of cooldowns. If you see the enemy jungler, being able to say, we see this guy, we know he's coming up, so you have to make sure you're worried for him. Or being able to say, we just saw the jungler bot side, so top laner, you're free to aggress as much as you want because he's on the opposite side of the map. That sort of thing, that sort of communication, it all sounds very basic, but it's very important because it helps your team out and it helps you overall coordinate. Especially later in the game, you want to be trying to coordinate the team to threaten objectives. And this is important because I oftentimes see teams when there's nothing left to fight on the map, right? Baron hasn't spawned yet. The Drake is currently dead. You can't really threaten towers. There's no reason to be looking to take fights, especially if you're behind. There's just no reason to be stepping up and saying, we want to fight right here. Because there's nothing to fight over. You may as well play defensively, just try to farm up and wait for the next time where you have to come to the enemy team, as opposed to just going for the fight regardless. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense to just keep looking for fights. Now, you can try looking for picks in that sort of downtime if you have good vision and you can find enemy team members alone in a side lane or in the jungle. That might give you a pick and maybe turn the game on its head. But generally speaking, if there isn't anything to fight over, just don't fight. You don't have to do it. It's sort of relevant to that as well. Knowing what objectives you can concede and which ones you can fight for can also help. If you know that this is the second Drake of the game, well, you don't necessarily have to fight for it. You can kind of say, that's fine. We'll sort of let the enemy team take that Drake because maybe we'll go take Herald. Maybe we'll be able to cheese out a tower, or just this will give us some uninterrupted time to farm. So you don't have to go super aggressively in that regard. In general, those are sort of my overall tips for playing Clash. This is a 5-man coordinated team environment, so that's why a lot of this stuff is going to be relevant, and I hope you guys got some sort of value out of these tips. If you have any of your own, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. Let other players know down in the comments. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts if there's anything that you found works particularly well in Clash. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.